Hi, this is James Maroney from AdmissionHook.com, and here I am on the University of Bridgeport campus with Bryan Gross, Assistant Dean of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of Bridgeport. We're going to talk a little bit about, of course, the college essay, but today we're going to do it a little bit differently. We're going to talk about the general application. A lot of students are surprised when they hear that the average application is only read for maybe 30 minutes at a typical college. Bryan, I was wondering if you could explain to us how UB goes through looking at the applications and who reads it and how much time they spend reading them.
I'd be happy to talk about that. At the University of Bridgeport, we work on rolling admissions. And what rolling admissions means is that as a student applies for admission, that application is reviewed. And we really pride ourselves on making an admissions decision usually in about 2 to 3 weeks from the time that we receive the application. Each student who applies is assigned an admissions counselor. And that's the first line of the person that actually reads their application. The admissions counselor is assigned by territory. So for instance, if you're a student living in Connecticut, your file would first be read by one of our 2 admissions counselors in the state of Connecticut. At that point, the admissions counselor is making one of 3 decisions. That admissions counselor is either going to reject that student's request for admission, they're either going to accept them directly into the university, or they're going to refer the file to our admissions review committee. Typically, the admissions counselor, as you stated, spends about 20 to 30 minutes, reviewing each file, and then if the file is sent to the admissions review committee, probably another 5 to 10 minutes is spent reviewing that file within the committee, and the committee consists of faculty members from every department around campus.
Okay, and then the committee will make the ultimate decision.
The committee will make the ultimate decision whether the student is accepted, rejected, or they might even at that point select a student to come in for an interview, a personal interview, in which case then the student is has to come to campus for an interview.
Great, thank you very much. Usually I like to ask people what their favorite essay was that they've read either in the past year or just in general. Today I'm going to change it up a little bit and say, can you give me an example of an essay that prevented a student from getting into the University of Bridgeport, or one of your least favorite essays?
That is a great question. I read all kinds of essays, and I really appreciate students who take their time and really work to have their own voice be heard. In the essay, we really want to try to get a sense of the student. To answer your question, I had a student this year who talked about being arrested for possession of drugs in their essay, and that was a hard essay to look upon favorably because while we didn't want to judge the student for that particular incident, throughout the essay the student made reference to the cops or other people in the incident and how it was their fault. And so it was really unfortunate when reading this essay. The student not only had this negative run-in with the law, but it was clear in the essay that the student wasn't taking responsibility for another action. So it was a real extreme essay. We don't get many essays like that. But we do sometimes have students who talk about mistakes that they've made in their lives. And usually the student will take the spin of how they've learned from those mistakes or how they've grown. And how it will help them as a student in college learning from those mistakes. But this essay really stood out as being one of the poorer ones that I've ever read.
Okay. Yeah. I guess, like you said, the big thing is the student did not take any responsibility for their own mistake or show any growth, which is what college is really all about.
Absolutely. So yeah, it made us wonder why the student was even applying to college in the first place. So absolutely.
What about your favorite essay from last year?
It's funny, there's one essay that really stands out, although there's a lot of really great ones. But one of the students who applied here lives in New York City, and he wrote about his experience being selected for a junior film academy in New York City, and he talked in his essay about his experience as a filmmaker and some of his motivations behind filming the film, and also talked about what he learned in the process, not only by making his own film, but working with some of his fellow students and some of the other teachers who had volunteered. This student really did a nice job in really making his voice be heard. I got a real sense of who he was. And he used some humor in there as well, which made it seem very real and down to earth. And it just had a different tone and a feel from a lot of the other essays, and it stood out as being really exceptional because I felt like I really got a sense of who the student was, who he really, really was, and I can tell he put a lot of time into this essay.
And that's very important. You want to read an essay and get a sense of what they're like as a person, which means that only one student can write that essay. So another advice, don't go out there and copy any essays, because the best essay is
one that's unique and real. And I can't tell you how many essays that I get where students start off and they quote, Aristotle or Einstein or Plato, and then they go into writing about what they think a college admissions essay would want to hear. And I think for the students, my tip is we read so many essays, and so many of them sound alike, that we really just kind of we'd almost like to read an essay and as if you were just speaking, conversationally. We want to get a sense of, again, who you are as a person, what really truly makes you tick. I don't want to dissuade students from writing about their mothers. That's something that's fine, it's personal a lot, but I guess as a tip, you have to understand that I get so many essays that talk about their mothers and the influence that sometimes that's a topic that it's hard to discriminate between. So, maybe as a small little tip, you might want to try to stand out by not writing about your mother.
Avoid the cliched topics.
Exactly.
Okay.
Big time.
So how I won the big game, summer travel, and then your mother.
Exactly.
It's now added to our list.
I get a lot about my mom, what a great influence my mom was. I look up to my mom, how she was great. And again, not to distract, that's all wonderful stuff, and it's really important that, students would look up to parents, but I do get a large percentage of essays that write about the same thing. So I like to hear about experiences in school, how they work through, conflicts or difficulties, or kind of what makes them tick, things like that. But it's hard to say in writing when you read the essay, you really sometimes get a sense that this student, their voice is really coming through in the essay. And that for me is really important. I want to try to get a sense of the student's voice in their writing.
Great advice. Thank you, Brian. A lot of times I hear admissions officers say that they wish a student would take more risks in their essay. Can you explain an example of a good risk, and do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree with it, because I like things, that are more outside the box. Humor is one, risk. I mean, I know humor is different for everyone, so sometimes that could be scary. Are they going to find this funny? Are they going to really get what I'm trying to say? But it's definitely a risk. And if done well and done subtly, and of course tactfully, you never want to use inappropriate humor or politically charged humor or something like along those lines. But humor, done appropriately, a student, reflecting on some of their own errors, or I think that's a good risk, worth taking. I think another risk too, for students out there could be not only just talking about, academics or clubs and activities, but talk about, relationships. For me, I think you learn so much when you're in college in the classroom, but you also learn a lot outside of the classroom in terms of the relationships that you have with your friends and your colleagues and your teachers. And so I tend to really like essays that talk about students, issues that they've had with relationships, whether it be with teachers, whether it be with family members, with friends, and how they've learned through navigating through those relationships.
That's great advice. College is a residential experience, and you're trying to craft a class, and you want to know that people are going to fit in, right? And they're going to, if they give you any indication they're going to be a problem from the essay, you don't want problems on your campus, I would assume.
Absolutely, and you raise a good point too about college being a residential experience, and we're always looking at the essay and we're trying to think about when we're reading them, how is the student going to fit in on our campus? And so I always love reading about special talent, even if, let's say, the student plays violin, but they're not applying to our major as a music major. I still like to hear about the student's interests, their hobbies. Maybe they're not interested in being a world traveler, but if they've been someplace special or unique and had some kind of unique experience, I sometimes read the essay and say, oh, this student might fit in really well in our student newspaper, or be really great for alternative spring break. And so I like to get a sense of the student more than what they're just hoping to study, but of who they are as a person, with well-rounded picture.
Great. Brian, I really appreciate you've given a lot of great tips.